Mateus, my man, it is so good to catch up with you today. I know we were chatting about this last year. Our schedules didn't link up, but it's finally nice to chop it up. And I know we were chopping up beforehand, but it's going to be fun, a fun show today for everyone to listen to what you have to talk about because I know we got some exciting topics that are on the forefront of your mind right now, but also you bring a plethora of knowledge and experience with your experience in professional sports. So I'm just pumped for everyone to get a chance to tune into one of our conversations.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, man. It's great to talk to you and see you again. Excited for the podcast and the conversation. So let's get it.
Let's just jump right into it because I know we have so many things that we want to get to, and I hope we have enough time today. So, before, for the audience sake and providing context of who you are and where you've been, let's take a quick 10,000-foot view and talk about what was your entry point into working with professional athletes within your career.
Yeah, so I was a previous athlete myself. I played a variety of sports, mainly soccer because I'm Brazilian, and I came to the U.S. when I was 18, 19 years old. My family had migrated here. My dad got a job, and I had to figure out how to adapt to a new country, etc. But right away, I knew I was going to try to pursue to be a professional soccer player. That was my dream. You grow up watching Ronaldinho and some of those guys on the Brazilian national team. You always aspire to be somebody in life, and that's the kind of visual we have as kids in Brazil. So that's what I want to do. So when I got here right away, I started playing college soccer at a small community college here in Maryland called Montgomery College, and did my first couple years of undergrad there, and then transferred to University of Maryland. As I transferred, I was trying to walk on to the University of Maryland soccer team, which was one of the top 10 teams in the country, Division One soccer. So had a shot to work out with them a little bit, do some stuff, and unfortunately, in the men's league game over the weekend, I tore my ACL, and that experience was a huge, uh, you know, crazy personal experience for myself, not only for me personally as an individual, but also as a professional, because I was still trying to decide what I wanted to do for a career in college. I wasn't really 100% into a specific career. Initially, my dad had almost forced me to be an economist like he is, but I could not see myself wearing a suit and tie every day. So, the experience with the ACL really showed me all the different, pathways that you can take in the healthcare field, from being a medical doctor to being a physical therapist to an athletic trainer to a strength and conditioning coach. I was exposed to the whole process, and I really identified with specifically the rehab and performance side of the process. I didn't want to spend 30 years in medical school. I knew that for sure. I actually went to PT school for a year. I got accepted into a program. I did the whole first year. It was a little biased program towards geriatrics, which again, it didn't identify with me and my passion. I wanted to do more of the sports route. So I transferred back and ended up completing a master's in sports performance, strength and conditioning at George Washington University. Um, pretty quickly fell in love with the field. I have a bit of an energy. I've got that personality. I like to be in front of groups, and I love to see people succeed, give them the tools to succeed. And I, you know, got an opportunity to work with DC United back in 2007, 2008, which is a professional MLS club here in DC. And from there, man, my career just kind of went into professional sports and soccer mainly. Um, Spending some time with Exos and Athletes Performance out in LA and Phoenix, working a couple national team gigs through Exos and Athletes Performance. I got the fabulous opportunity to go to the World Cup in 2010 with the men's national team, part of Bob Bradley's staff, and that was unbelievable, unforgettable, like a dream come true. As a professional, we strive for those moments, and that's really what I was working towards as a pro. And then I had a couple other stints in MLS with Kansas City franchise, Miami, and came back to my first club, which was DC United a couple years ago, and essentially, did my last 2 years in pro sport. I don't want to say my last because you never know when the last is going to be, but just due to some family dynamics and logistics, I have 2 young kids. I wanted to get back to them. And, after spending 15 years in pro sport, the idea was to get back the time to them at this moment when my kids are a pain in the butt and they're teenagers. So, we're now in a phase where I'm running my own business. I'm doing some consulting and running some workshops. I enjoy training other trainers. But I also have a full-time job with a facility and company called the St. James, which is a big sports and wellness facility down here in the Virginia, D.C. area. 500,000 square feet, soccer, gymnastics, ice hockey, basketball, volleyball, you name it. We have 15, 16 sports under a roof, and we run and operate travel teams for kids as early as 8 all the way to 18. And I'm the director of health and performance for the St. James. So I have a group of trainers and nutritionists and people that basically support our middle school and our high school athletes as they, draw this path to hopefully becoming a college athlete and maybe a professional athlete. So that's where we're at now, my brother.
And have had quite the experience, and I'm really excited to dive into the St. James side of things because I know long-term athletic development, the youth, your personal stories with your daughter right now going through a knee injury. I know we're going to dive there, but what I want to do first, I want to set the stage with some of the experiences you had because I think it's important. What you're on to and what your passion is trying to bring your experiences from the professional setting, right? You said U.S. national team, Sporting KC, Inter Miami, DC United, all these things where you were exposed to high performance. And what you're trying to do, what I admire, is bring that same mentality down to the youth, down to the
Yeah.
middle school and the high school. So let's pull it back here a little bit and talk about some of those experiences early on so people have some context from where you're coming from and what you're trying to do. So if we think back to some of your
Yeah.
earlier career, let's go back to like 2008, 2010. You're a performance specialist, really in the soccer world, a fitness coach was kind of the term for a while, right? Let's hone in on like 3 key responsibilities that you were responsible for with the team that you were a part of.
Yeah, initially in my career in pro sport, I was a lot more of the hands-on practitioner, right? So you're the guy on the field, you're the guy in the gym, you're helping the guys improve mainly the physical component of things, right? The physical side. And that's your responsibility. You're there with the coaching staff, you help organize training sessions, you help on the periodization. That's the main kind of job function. But that evolved over the years as the departments started growing. We started adding new people. We started adding new expertise into our team. And as soon as you bring in a nutritionist, as soon as you bring in a return to play specialist, and then you bring in a sports scientist, you bring in a mindset specialist, and all of a sudden you start creating and assembling a team that's responsible now for the health and well-being of that team. So instead of doing it by yourself and wearing multiple hats, and realistically not being able to do all those jobs, because as you know, it's a lot to take on for one person, one individual. Adam, I don't know, I lost you on the image. I don't know if that's me or you.
I'm still here. I still got you here.
Oh, he's still there? Okay, I just don't see you anymore. I thought we lost the connection. But yeah, the idea being that as we added these different professionals, we now have a lot more expertise in the room, and the job now became more of a coordinator type role, less of a practitioner role, where now you put other people in the position to be successful, do what they love and do what they have a passion for, but you are essentially connecting all those different functions and cogwheels. I like to think of high performance as a series of cogwheels that are interrelated, interdependent. And therefore, if you're taking care of the nutrition piece, if you're taking care of the physical side, if you're taking care of the mindset and the mental well-being, and you're taking care of the recovery and workload management and sports science and the monitoring and all that stuff kind of comes together to ultimately support the players and give feedback to the coaching staff so they can go make the important decisions that they have to make. We're still always a support system for them, We're not going to be final decision makers. Now there are some small things and details if you're talking about rehab and return to play that we do make those decisions because we are the experts, but it is a collaboration. I think that's the big word of the of the whole system is collaboration, and you work together as a team with the athletes centered in the middle, versus the old school way where you had the athletes more on the periphery and not so much as the center of discussion. Um, we have no egos. You put your egos on check, and you really just offer your expertise and decide as a group what's best for the athlete, for the group, for the team, and that's kind of how the high performance concept works. So that's how my career evolved during the later stages in professional sport. I was more of a coordinator, um, more of a manager of high performance rather than the grinder, the practitioner who's there, who's doing warm-ups, who's doing weight room sessions, who's doing stuff on the field, conditioning, who's prepping the post-workout shakes, who's got the pills laid out, all the multivitamins and all the fish oils and all that stuff early in practice. You're the guy researching into orthotics and what's good and what's bad. Should we do this or not? Recovery pants. Should we wear these compression pants on flights or not? Which one? Like all those decisions. On top of that, managing, the gym work, which is tough if you got a roster of 30, 40 athletes. Um, Thinking about GPS and force plates and data collection and all. It's just too much. You can't do it all. So I think the high performance concept works really well, as long as you have the right expertise in place and everybody can check their ego at the door and collaborate.
And that's such a huge component of it too, because this environment does attract some of the best at what they do. And when you're good at what you do, you you have an ego, you have a little chip on your shoulder, and no one's at fault. Like anyone that says they don't have an ego, I struggle to believe that. So the fact that you acknowledging, hey, like you got to leave it at the door, it's easier said than done. It's definitely something I think we all struggle with at some point in our
Right.
career. But for what you just alluded to,
Right.
like what I just heard was in the analogy you was like a cog, like so many cogs in the wheel, just keep the motion going. It's like you have to be willing to put that aside and do the job at hand, and just knowing that you're part of something bigger than what you are, and that it's a collective group. And the 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 size of these teams have just grown so much. And one piece that
Yeah.
you mentioned that I want to double click on with you, because it ties into some of what you were saying as far as decision making, executive decision. What do we do next? What's our process? What's our system? And it's this era of sports science and technology, because you and I were in MLS at a time when it really started to boom and it really started to be a part of what we do. And I remember you and I sitting at conferences trying to decipher GPS data, like what does all of this mean, and how do we use it?
Right.
So the
Right.
question I have for you
Right.
is, I think we look back to that 15 years ago, and the pendulum swung so far one way, where we were maybe looking at too much, being too cautious, being overly sensitive, to then moving away from it the other way. It was like, oh, none of this stuff means anything. To now, I think we've kind of settled somewhere in the middle. So the question I have for you is, how do we take the influence of the last 15, 20 years of tech and sports science to improve the training that we're doing now?
Yeah, and I think you touched on a couple things that are crucial in that process. Um, yeah, I remember when we got our first GPS unit, and it weighed 80 pounds. You had to drag this huge box around. The data would come out. You weren't even sure if it was accurate. I remember I was doing some tests, and I took some of those pods, and then I took two other companies' pods. I put it in the back of my truck. I drove around, and then I downloaded the data to see if, like, the basic metrics like total distance and high intensity distance were even congruent. And it was all over the shop. Like, even the devices themselves, I think the hardware wasn't even good enough to record and display what we thought were the numbers that we saw on a daily basis. So I think the hardware and the technology has improved significantly. I don't think we have those issues anymore, or not as many. Now it comes down to how to interpret the data and what to do with the data. I think we went through a phase probably in the last, 5 to 10 years where none of us really knew, and we were just experimenting and learning together. And now we have some more best practices. Now we have some more visualization analysis techniques that make sense and are backed up by science. So I think we've come a long way, but still, you have to be very cautious as to how that comes in and plugs into all the different variables in the system that you have in place at the club or at the team you're working in. Because I know teams that value, for example, GPS data very much, and that's like their primary decision maker. I know other teams that kind of look at it, but they also get their eyes involved and the feel and the vibe and try to connect it with other, subjective measures, other objective measures, and then as a global unit, make a decision based on the data globally, not just one variable or one primary variable. But it really comes down to what you're more comfortable with and what your coaches and the upper management is comfortable with. That communication is really the crucial piece. So you have to almost do a reverse approach where you start with the coaching staff and the upper management, and you kind of get a vibe of what helps them make decisions. And then you go through a phase of a little bit of education on the stuff that they don't know, because if they don't know, it doesn't matter what you present to them. How are they ever going to interpret it? And then you go through this final stage of, okay, now we got the communication, and now you guys understand we're talking apples to apples. Here's what I propose as the decision making, the KPIs. Here's how we're going to go through it. So that process, I think, is more important than starting on the other side and focusing on the science and the tech and the sport technology per se and the best practices that other people are doing. Because if not, like I said, no matter what you present to the staff, you're not going to have optimal communication and understanding. I think that's more important. So I've always been a big believer in looking at a variety of factors, not just one, especially if you're talking about tech and sports technology. Nowadays we have force plate analysis. We've got, isometric force measuring devices. We've got, all sorts of chemistry that we can run on the players to try to determine fatigue levels and stress levels, and you can monitor their sleep. You can, you can tell how much deep sleep they're having at night. I mean, there's so much out there. At the end of the day, right, my best friend when it came to decisions like that was my relationships with the players, because I would sit in the locker room, literally sit in the locker room for like 30 minutes as those guys are coming in for practice every morning, and I'm just having a chat. What's up? What's going on? How we doing? That hamstring's tight, isn't it? I can tell you're limping around. What's going on? So now that conversation becomes a lot more intimate, and if there is a trust and a bond between coach and athlete, they will tell you the truth. They'll tell you what's going on. They'll tell you the truth as long as you have that relationship. And then you go to the objective data and you try to confirm or deny that conversation and that connection you have with the player. So that's how I operate, and that's how I've done many years in my personal practice at the different teams I've worked in. Again, it comes down to all those different variables and how you can make the best decisions for the team. Because at the end of the day, what matters is, are we doing the best for the group?
It's a great point in the what's best decision for the team. And I wanna take a few steps back to a comment you said of going to management or going to the front office and learning how they make decisions, because I've made the mistake in my career of saying, hey, this is how I evaluate a situation. Here's my decision making process. This is what we should do. Versus, hey, coming at it from a place of curiosity and learning, how can I support the decisions that you make? Because the reality is, we have to be honest with ourselves. We are not the highest key stakeholder in these organizations that make the decisions. The point that you said of learning how they make decisions is a critical component, because if we don't understand that, no matter how intelligent we are, no matter how much research is out there, if we're not giving the key stakeholders the best information that they need to make a decision, to feel educated and confident in what they're doing, then we may be missing a boat early on. And so the
Yeah.
follow-up question I have to that is I want to be devil's advocate and say, what if you have an inexperienced and uneducated, not uneducated, excuse me, that's the wrong word, a person that lacks the knowledge in the space that maybe you have in the space that you exist in? How do you get them to a space of understanding that maybe their intentions or ideas are not congruent with where modern medicine or modern performance may be? How do you get them to a space of you giving them what they need, but also them bringing them up to the level that you're at?
Yeah, it's very hard. You're talking about the old schooler, right? You're talking about the old school versus the new school. So there's a couple ways to go about it. My personal experience is people learn by making mistakes and seeing positive things happen with their own eyes. Okay. Um, I can tell you from experience that that shift happened to me personally with one of the coaches I worked with when, I tried so hard for so much time to educate, to try to give him the information from a dummy approach all the way to a more technical approach, to have him value what I value, right? To try to educate him on the actual technical aspects so that he can see how I see through my own lens. Um, and it really came down to one situation with one player where I went up to him and I said, "Look, coach, I think this guy is at a high risk for something happening. Here's why I think that." I gave him all the different reasoning. And I said, "You make the decision you want, but I'm telling you that I'm pretty sure something's going to happen with this guy." And here we go. Game happens. Coach decides to put the player in. It was a high stakes game. 10 minutes into the game, boom, pulled groin, right? As soon as the player is walking out, I could see the coach looking over at me and he goes like this. Game is over. We go in the locker room. He calls me in. He said, "Mateus, you bring me whatever you need to bring, and I'm going to listen." And that was it. It was the change because it had to happen. He had to see it with his own eyes because an old dog, it's very hard to trick an old dog new tricks, right? But with that one exposure that, has him build enough trust, it's all it takes. Because at the end of the day, the coach also wants the best for the team. And if they're hard headed, depending on their personality and depending on how they operate, you got to figure out a way to get in there. And that was the way I figured out. I voiced it. Previously, I was probably a little bit more passive and I would just give him information. Maybe it was on a piece of paper or maybe it was on a dashboard that he could see a little traffic light system. Here's the risk analysis. Go make the decision you want. But for this specific case, I said I need to step up for this player because I'm pretty sure something's going to happen. He's not ready. He's not ready or he's been accumulating this much, whatever the reasons were, and it happened. So that was the moment and the shift for him. And from that day on, he became a new dog. And he was so open and he all of a sudden wanted to listen to everything. He started showing up to our force plate testing in the morning. He started showing up to our wellness stuff. He started showing up to the lifts. He started showing up to all these different things we were doing with the players because he was curious. He was like, how the hell did this guy know? Right? So, yeah, that's, I think, one of my experiences. The other is, again, depending on the person, and it comes down to personality and, a little bit of the ego check, is I've always taken a very dummy approach to trying to explain to them. And I start with the questions. I start with what are their objectives? What are their goals? What do you want to achieve? What is important to you? What would you like to know? And then I kind of decipher my algorithm to try to, give him those answers in the best way possible so that he can go make those decisions. And then maybe we do step two. Okay, based on what you want to know, here are some other ideas that we can look at. Are you interested in looking at some of this stuff? Hey, by the way, come to our testing in the morning, match day -2, and maybe you can see some of this thing live and you understand why we do this stuff. Okay. And then maybe ultimately you want to get to step 3, right? Where the coach has a pretty good understanding, technical knowledge is good, and whatever you present to them, it generates a healthy discussion, and they're going to take that value into their decision-making process. So there's no one answer, right, Adam? I think it really depends on the approach you take, depending on the stage you're in and the personality profiles and that sort of stuff.
There's 3 words that I was taking mental notes here as you were walking through the scenario. The first one is courage. Courage on your end to, what you know, and you felt fairly confident in a certain situation to say, hey, I need to speak up. And I think that's easy, much, much easier said than done because of the high stakes, the pressure, just the system that sports can be. So I think one word I heard was courage. I got to find the courage to use those bullets, right? You can't use them all the time, but hey, like when you know, you know. The second word I heard was patience, right? Like you were very patient. It's almost like you knew, hey, like I'm just gonna keep pumping this information, keep pumping this education, keep offering these opportunities, and I may do this all. It's like the analogy comes is the casino, right? You just keep pulling the slot, right? You just keep pulling the slot machine, and eventually you're gonna hit. And eventually you did, right? You had that one case of, oh man, like, hey coach, I had the courage to step up. Hey, this is what I believe in. I've been pulling this thing for a long time. I've been pulling this lever. Eventually I'm going to get trip sevens. And you did, right? Eventually it happened. Not trip sevens in the sense we wanted that for the player, but in the sense that, hey, we hit our moment to come to an understanding. And then the third piece that I heard was just, and I think it encompasses all of that, is just education. I do believe, knowledge is power. And if you can understand and have an appreciation, you don't have to understand at the deepest level that you may do, but having that knowledge and appreciation can hopefully, like you said, create the conversations that need to exist. And your way of going about it, asking questions, was brilliant. And I think, just like I heard that, such a great experience and great piece here, that I would be remiss if I didn't double click on some of those points.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you start with a question and then you work backwards. And, like I said, ultimately everybody, I think we all have the same goal, because you ask any coach questions, they'll come up with a list of 5 to 10 questions, and they're all very similar questions, because at the end of the day, they just want to know what they need to know to make the decisions, right? So if we're looking to win games, you want to put your best players who are in their best, physical shape, they're mentally ready, and they have a low risk of something happening, because we don't want to jeopardize the next 4, 5, 6, 8 games. So they're all in that same interest, and we're all after the same answers. It's just the human communication piece and the interaction, because it does come down to trust. I'm going through that right now. I don't know if we're going to get time to talk about some of the other topics, but I'm going through that now with my own daughter, who just tore her ACL at 12 years of age. So crazy shock for me as a father, as a professional, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the best outcome for her? What do we do? Do we do surgery? Do we wait? If we do surgery, what type of surgery? Because she's going through a growth spurt. ACL reconstructions on kids less than 13 is not abundant. There's not a lot of cases. The cases have become more prevalent now, as we've seen in history. We used to talk about pros getting ACLs, then it went to college athletes, then it went to high school athletes. Now we're talking about 9, 10-year-olds having ACL reconstruction, which is crazy, So I'm going through that process now of trust with the surgeons that I'm speaking to, because again, we don't have a lot of evidence on the best practices for somebody this age. So it's going to come down to a feel thing. And do I trust the surgeon enough to stick the knife in my daughter's knee, which might impact the rest of her life, the rest of her soccer career, whatever it is? So it's a trust thing, and it comes down to the basic fundamentals of human interaction, which to me are communication, respect, and you gotta have some type of empathy and care. And I don't like to say love because I don't want to sound mushy mushy, but if you care about the other person, then guess what? You're going to be able to respect them a whole lot more. You're going to be able to, communicate effectively a lot more because you want the best outcome for whatever you guys are doing together. So that's the stage I'm in with the surgeons. And I think it's the same thing that happens between a sports science or a performance or a rehab practitioner with a coach. You got to get to that stage where you have that trust, because when you have the trust, the coach is going to listen to you. When you don't have the trust and you haven't established those fundamentals of human dynamics, no matter how you can be a triple PhD in force plate analysis, and you're going to sit in front of the coach and he's going to look at you like, who are you? I don't even want to have a conversation with you. I don't even know your name. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that's kind of that's how I see it. And if you start with the human side first and you establish those connections initially, I think it's a lot easier to do our jobs.
1,000%. I'm like, what's it like? I'm over here snapping fingers, big old boop sign from the emoji. I mean, you nailed on, you nailed on so many key points that you definitely wouldn't have gotten to if you didn't live and endure the experiences you had. And I do want to double click on and tap into where you're at right now, especially with the case with you're dealing with your daughter and the work you're doing over at St. James, because we did set the stage here to
Yeah,
say, hey, Mateus has seen some stuff. He's done some great work in his career at a very high level. And now what he's trying to do is not only in his personal life with his daughter and deciphering what are we going to do with an ACL tear and a pre-adolescent, right? Sorry, an adolescent, a preteen, right? Under the age of
right,
13. What are we going to do in that
right.
moment? But now you're also at the same level, taking everything that you talked about earlier in this conversation from high performance, from multiple departments, bringing everybody together to make an executive decision. You're trying to bring that model to the masses at the St. James of what long-term athletic development and strength and conditioning and performance training and rehab, everything that goes in at that center for the middle school and high school athlete. So I'm gonna leave this question up to you and take it where you want, because I know your wheels are spinning. We were chatting about this pre-show, so I know you got a lot here. Right, when it comes to
Yeah,
long-term athletic development and taking your experiences in high performance at the professional level, where's the starting point and how do you do it?
yeah. I think it's a it's a long answer, but I'm just a realist, and I look at what I've gone through in my personal life, and I like to think about, always relate things back to my grandparents and what would my grandma say, you know? What will my grandma say to my kids when they show up from school after spending 8 years, or sorry, 8 hours sitting down in front of a laptop screen? Okay, because that's how they learn nowadays. I don't even know if my kids really know how to write with a pencil and a pen anymore. They know how to type, but I don't know if they know how to write. And I don't know the last actual physical book that they opened up and read as a book versus reading it on their laptop screen. That's the generation we're in now. Okay. So my grandma would say this. She would say, okay, go get a book, go read for about 30 minutes to an hour. Then you're going to go outside, go play in the park until it's about 9 p.m. Come back home for dinner. We're going to sit down as a family, have dinner. We're going to talk about the day, and then you're going to go to sleep. Okay. In that day, in that journey, there is zero mention to you're going to sit down for 2 or 3 more hours, watch a show on TV. Then you're going to play on Snapchat and TikTok on your phone. You're not going to go outside because there's nobody at the park. There's nobody playing. Your buddies aren't knocking on your door to come outside and play anymore. That doesn't exist. So, therefore, you live a relatively sedentary lifestyle from that perspective. On top of that, because we as parents we're a little bit crazy in this aspect, and we think about our kids future and we want the best for them, and some parents live the desire to be a professional athlete through their kid, right? The desires they had when they were kids never came to fruition, so now they're trying to live it through their kids. So then they put their kids at 6, 7 years of age at a full-time academy, baseball, football, soccer, whatever it might be. Kid is now getting instructional, structured instruction on a sport. They're playing that sport 10 to 11 months out of the year. They go and practice, whatever, 3 or 4 times a week. The weekends are games. Parents are driving like crazy. They don't stop because there's a game here, a game there, and you got to go regional, and then you got to go national. I can go on and on and on. But what you start drawing really quickly, Adam, is a picture of what kids used to grow up like 20, 30 years ago versus what kids are growing up like now. And to me, when I ask the surgeons and the doctors, why are we having ACLs at kids as early as 8 or 9? All of them have the same answer, and it matches exactly with my feelings that I've had for so many years. The combination of the influence of electronics and kids being sedentary and not exposed to a variety of biomechanical motions and stimulus to their tendons, bones, ligaments, muscles that you would have if you were rolling around in the park all day, jumping around, landing on one leg, landing on two legs, unpredictable, totally random movement, okay? And the ability to play multiple sports, do a sport in the spring, do a sport in the fall, do another sport in the winter, and vary the stimulus for the kids in a way that it almost shields them or bulletproofs them from soft tissue injuries. Um, Combined with the fact that we are, as a society, a lot less aware of all of this and a lot more focused on let's make this kid the next NBA All-Star. And therefore, he needs to start, AAU basketball at 6 years of age. It's crazy. So when you think about those two factors, the surgeons all agree early specialization is a problem. Okay. And the fact that these kids aren't bulletproof through a variety of activities and an active lifestyle because of the influence of electronics, because of society also thinking that it's not okay for a kid to go to the park anymore because we're scared they're going to get kidnapped. Like my parents never worried about that. Like I used to go to the park, I'll spend 10 hours at the park. I'll come home safe, So now we're all freaking out here thinking I can't send my kid to the park because he might not come back home. So you've got all these factors playing into what I think is an epidemic now of early injuries. And I think it's just going to get worse if we keep going this route. So I think I talked a lot there, but maybe I drew a good picture of as to why I think we're going through this now and as to why I'm so concerned because it just happened to my own daughter. Even though I can tell you, I tried my best to go against the traditional, uprising that we have in society now and ripped the phone out of her hands so many times, kicked her out of the house, go play, go do something. Let's register you for basketball in the winter. Let's do, swimming in the summer. I tried, but still it happened, How much is enough? I don't know. How much do we need to change? I don't know, but there's something there, man. And I think we got to investigate as a scientific body. We have to attack this because it is not normal for an 8, 9-year-old to tear an ACL, man. That's not normal. I don't think that's normal. That's scary stuff.
I would agree there that that is not normal, and I think the reference point I want to bring us back to is before we started this show, you were talking about how you had a recent experience with one of the physicians you were talking to, and I just kind of give you the
Yeah.
our audience here the short version. Correct me if I'm wrong here as well. Please step in. The physician said, "Hey, back in the 80s and 90s, I was doing these surgeries on only professional athletes. Early 2000s started being college, maybe elite high school. 2010s, 2020s, you're starting to see early teens and cases like yourself where you're having 8, 9, 10-year-olds having to consider some of these reconstructive surgeries that once again 20, 30 years ago was not the case. So the question I have
Yeah.
to kind of like understanding some of this, and I agree with you you got to consider societal influences. You have to consider the world that we live in now. Times are changing, right? We can't go back and say, hey, we got to change this in time. The question we have to do is, okay, we look at history, what we've done, we look at our present conditions, and we got to decide how do we make decisions for future implications, right? So the question I have for you is, having this personal experience with the exposure that you've had in the professional setting to now your current role working in that long-term athletic development model, what is it that you believe we can start to do when it comes to, the training, the specialization, how, aside from the social aspect
Yeah.
of go play in the park, put the phone down, I understand those, but we have to, as practitioners, decide, hey,
Right.
like you said, as a scientific body, how are we going to move forward? From your perspective, how do you move forward?
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you can't correct all the other variables, you can control what you can control. And that's the time I have with my kids at the St. James, for example. And I actually got this idea when I went to visit Manchester City's facility 5 or 6 years ago. And I went to their academy and I noticed they had this huge, they had an indoor space and they had an outdoor space. And it's basically like a playground, okay, like a jungle gym. And they would put the kids 2 times a week, either indoor or outdoor, depending on whatever temperature was. And they'll just do activities with the kids. Some of it looked like gymnastics, some of it looked like just free play in the park, play tag, play capture the flag, do some other stuff. And these are high level 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old soccer players playing for an EPL, one of the biggest clubs in the world. And there, I asked the director that, I was like, what's going on here? He's like, well, Mateus, essentially we're providing them what they don't have and what they don't do anymore. And we feel like this is an awesome way to give them a stimulus that we feel will protect them from injuries more than the traditional approach that we have in performance, which is doing your weightlifting, doing your speed, agility, quickness, trying to buffer in some of those activities so that you expose them and you prepare the soft tissue to those unpredictable scenarios. So they do a combination of the two things. They expose them to the unpredictable free play stuff, gymnastics, roll around, jump around, hop around. And they also give them some of the more structure, doing your squats, doing your deadlifts, getting in there, doing your control plyometrics, different angles, different velocities, different directions, apply force at different parts of the force velocity spectrum so that ultimately you give the athlete a full exposure and give them this protective effort to try to prevent some of these injuries that we see. So I thought that was freaking awesome. So I came back and I was like, that's it. That's what I got to do, and that's what I got to try to provide. And that's what we're doing now at the St. James is we have structure, strength and conditioning, traditional performance training, and then we also give the kids an exposure because we have a big gymnastics center and we'll have some activities planned out for them in there where they roll around, they learn how to do a cartwheel. Some of these kids don't know how to do cartwheels, like simple stuff. Some kids don't know how to do like a little somersault. They don't know like the basics of movement and things that we learned when we were in school, when we were little. And for me, I think that's kind of the path and that's the way I would go.
I'm curious about a question because I feel like this is a an internal question I've had with those in our profession before, right? Like in school, right, we all have to learn how to take, study math, study science, study history, right? Like they're just basic foundational
Yeah.
subjects that we have to learn, right? So I take that same frame of mind and say, hey, Mateus, you have to create a curriculum for a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old when it comes to activities in sports. What are the foundational activities in sports you would prefer to expose or create this curriculum for? What would those three sports or activities be?
Yeah, I wouldn't even start with sport. I mean, yeah, I would start with sports, but I would try to teach every sport. Um, I personally put my son in gymnastics when he was 6 or 7 years old, and he was the only boy. 30 girls in the class, and he's the only boy, right? And he's coming back is like, Dad, what's going on here? Like, as a 6, 7-year-old, they're not really even aware. But to me, I think gymnastics teaches you so much of the ABCs of movement, so much of the basics, the fundamentals. It's structured, but it's also a lot of free movement, which I love. So I take that idea and that's where I extrapolate, my different interventions. So you think about um, some of those activities. I would kind of let that guide me and incorporate that into my own performance training program. On top of doing different sports, I think kids just need to try everything, man. Go try everything. There's no one or two or three sports. Go try it all. You should try a sport that requires general movement, something like American football. Sure, flag football. Go have fun. If you're scared about the concussions, you should try a sport that incorporates, um, eye and arm coordination, hand-eye coordination. Okay, go play some baseball, go play some volleyball, go do something different that incorporates these extremities. You should play some soccer, learn how to use your feet. Sure, foot-eye coordination, all that stuff. Ultimately, you just got to do it all. Go swim, go play tennis. Just learn it all. I think the more exposure you give, the better. And that applies to the early ages for sure. As you're becoming 4, 5, 6 years old, all the way into your early 10, 11, kind of you start getting to middle school. You're probably selecting now 2 or 3 activities that you desire and you like more. By the time they're in high school, then you can focus on 1 or 2 sports, and then you can early specialize. But we can't be early specializing kids when they're 5 years old. I'm against that. That's my opinion. People can say whatever they want. I'm a firm believer that the more you early specialize, sure, you have the cases of kids that make it and they go kill it and they become the next Michael Jordan. But look at Kobe Bryant. Look at Michael Jordan. Look at the best sports figures in the sport. They all played other sports and they can do various things. They don't just do one thing.
I would agree with that because I think I'll speak on just recent athletes I've worked with is, yes, they're great at the sport that they do, but you take them off the court and man, they're great at soccer. They're great at ping pong. They can throw a, throw make a throw from center field to home plate on the dime, right? Like those things, like you're talking about, the robustness that comes with playing with so many activities leads to that diversity. And two like reference points I want to just share with the audience here is, a great resource is David Epstein's book Range that talks exactly about exposing, what happens when you take a generalist approach versus specialist approach when it comes to elite athletes. And then the other one, and I don't have it on hand, I'll have to put it in the show notes here, but I remember years ago reading a study about the German Olympic team, and they did a retro analysis looking at, hey, of our Olympians, when did they start to specialize? And what they found is the majority of them started to specialize, which would be the equivalent of high school, right? Somewhere in their late teenage years, they started to
Yeah.
specialize. But early on, they noticed, man, they were doing all sorts of things, right? And I'll even use a present day example of Matt Turner of U.S. men's soccer national team. The guy didn't start being competitive in soccer until I believe he got into end of high school, if not maybe early college at Stony
16,
Brook.
yes, 16, yep.
Right. So like you hear some of these stories and it makes you think, oh, like where does this generalist for specialization exist? And I'm going to be devil's advocate for you here. The only success that I've heard from specialization when it comes to starting young is I think those like task specific sports such as golf, and even you could even consider tennis at some regard too,
Yeah.
just because it's
Yeah.
such a constraint based sport that sometimes a specialization is beneficial for the development of those skills. But
Yeah.
for long-term health, you and I both know those people are probably still doing other activities well. And if you need a frame of
100%.
reference, just go watch what is it with Will Smith about the Williams sisters. Go watch that story and how much of that is true or not. But father of the Williams sisters literally was pulling their daughters out of tennis
Right.
school to go to Disney, go for
Right.
a run in the
Right.
park, things like
Do it
that.
all.
So I share all these present day concepts and everything that you just talked about. There's validation there, and there's reasons why that the generalization model is a beneficial strategy for long-term athletic development.
Yep. That's I'm right there with you. Like I said, I don't think I have an answer for everything, but all that we evidence as professionals and what's out there now anecdotally is pointing us towards don't be specializing. You're probably going to crush them, with the exception of some of these skills that you're talking about. So, brother, just I'm looking at my computer here. I don't have my power cord, but I got 3 or 4 minutes before it dies. I don't know if you want to continue until I find the power cord or if you're good to to finish it
No,
up? You tell me.
let's no worries, man. We will wrap it up because technology is getting the better of us today. So hey, there's one question I want to hit on you here
Yeah.
with the experiences you've had, and it's pertinent to the purpose of this podcast, right? Like we're all about
Yeah.
trying to educate and understand how do we get better as practitioners. But you and I both know, and I even heard you say it in this podcast, like trust, communication. There's so much more that goes into it, other than just being a technical savant at what you do. And so the
Mhm.
question I always like to kind of bounce off our guests here and for our community is this idea of optimism and finding small wins. Because in the context of a season, it's a roller coaster of emotions. When you win, you keep moving forward. When you lose, it's a freaking earthquake, man. And so the emotional highs and lows can somewhat be draining, but it's also, the support staff is usually the one that keeps the boat, trying to stay course, keep everybody steady, because if we get caught up in those emotions, it can be a disaster. So the final question I
Yep.
have for you today, man, just, and I know we'll probably catch up again soon, is, the concept of finding small wins. How do you yourself find the small wins? And then the latter question being, how do you help those around you continue to find their wins when emotions are up and down?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail there. You talk about the roller coaster of emotions that you go through in a season in sports. The roller coasters of emotions you might even go through your own personal life. I think those are very similar. But you do have to focus on your controllables and focus on those small wins that you might be able to, you know, take on a daily basis that eventually accumulate to make an actual impact and a difference on the outcomes and the performance of the team. Um, you know, I always relate this to my previous experiences when times were tough or whatever we were going through. But I remember one specific instance with a player I had in Kansas City. This was a highly talented player picked up in the first round of the draft, and he had played some games, and then the coach kind of elected to play another player, and I can notice the player start to detach himself from the group, isolate himself, head down, a little depressed, you know, and I can tell it was affecting him a lot. And I knew, as a coach with some years of experience and as a human being, that we needed that person, we needed that player because he could make an impact for the team and help. So I decided to just take charge myself, and after practice, I sat down with him and I invited him to go grab some lunch. I'd never done this with him before. Obviously, we had a good relationship, and he was like, "Yeah, cool, man. I don't have anything to do for the rest of the day. Let's go." And we just had a really cool eye to eye, coach to athlete. It really, realistically, it was a person to person conversation, and it got emotional. And he shared with me what was going through his mind, and that he was frustrated. He didn't know how to deal with it. And I just offered him my tips and my advice at that moment. And I told him, look, don't stop doing what you're doing. Like, the opportunity will come. But if you do what you're doing right now, that opportunity will probably not come. So you have a choice to make. And I came down to this word, which I think is choice, right? Choice. You choose what mood you want to wake up in when you roll out of bed. It's a personal choice. It's a choice to train hard and put effort. The controllables that we can't necessarily demand others to do because they got to elect that choice themselves. They have to make that personally. So I told them, I said, come back, go grind, go do what you do, and the opportunity will come back to you. I promise you it will. And, it came back, man. It was just before playoffs. He came on. I remember him scoring a goal against, I never forget this game. We're playing the Houston Dynamo in Kansas. It was freaking 20 degrees. And he scored like the goal of his life. He helped us through to the other round. And that was it. It was just the small little moment, the small little detail that maybe goes by and you don't even notice, or sometimes we ignore because we're so focused on everything else. But it's the recognition that at the end of the day, it's a bunch of human beings interacting, and there are emotions, and it's just a matter of recognizing when you can step out of your shell take charge and, again, have the courage to speak. Maybe nothing would have come out of that conversation if the player had elected to have a bad attitude and still, not react the way he was. But because I was just honest and I showed him a little love and a little care, and we communicated, which I go back to those three fundamentals we spoke about, right? That was it. He opened up, and it was the little spark he needed to get back. So I didn't do anything technical. I didn't do any sports science on him. I didn't design some fabulous drill, some like shooting, finishing drill for the guy to do that technically better. It was just a moment. So I think the small wins matter, and I think a lot of times we just got to go back to the fundamentals. Think about the coaches that were super, super successful in the 60s, 70s, 80s who had no technology, who maybe had one staff member as an assistant. Maybe it was two guys with 30 players, 40 players, and maybe they're by themselves. Why were those guys successful? Well, they're probably successful because they took into account this stuff we're talking about, because they didn't have the other stuff. And winning comes down to a lot of different factors. And yeah, we can talk about the 1% and the 2% and all these different details, but ultimately the Chicago Bulls, the teams that, are winners on a consistent basis, they do the fundamentals right. They do all the other stuff too, because they have to modernize in a sense, but they do the fundamentals right. And I think the fundamentals come down to these human elements that sometimes we neglect in a sports environment.
And that was that was wonderful. You touched on so many great points that I have nothing else to add, man. It was so insightful, and I just appreciate you sharing that story, because the stories provide context, right? We could say what a small win is, but you sharing that moment with the player just gives us. You could feel it. You could feel how much passion there was in that conversation. You set in the scene of that the goal in the playoffs and moving on to the next round. Like, you're right. Like those, I think the phrase you said was, that moment may have led to nothing, but it led to something. And unless you try to acknowledge those wins along the way, I don't necessarily know if you get through to the next round.
That's it. That's it. That's
Well,
it.
man, this was fun, man. I really enjoyed catching up with you. One, seeing your face, because it's been a while since we've seen each other over here. But this has been a fantastic episode. I know I learned a bunch from you. I hope the audience took away a few nuggets as well. So most important thing about the show is, man, where can people connect with you? How can we learn more about Mateus and what he's doing? And if people want to reach out, what do they do?
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. I'm on your traditional. I don't like the social media too much, but I'm on there. On Instagram at Manoel Performance. That's just Manoel Performance altogether. I'm on Twitter too, and if you go to the St. James, thestjames.com is a little information on where I'm at now. There's a whole profile page there with some details on the high performance program that we run at the St. James. So yeah, feel free to reach out. And I'm all about making things better. And if anything, I learned my lesson through my many years in sport that without the ego check and without the collaboration, we never progress as a society, and we never learn from our mistakes. So I think we're at a crucial time where we got to start making some decisions about how we're going to move forward, especially with these next generations, and we can't do that without a team effort. So appreciate the time, buddy. It's good to see you too, and I wish you all the best this season. But yeah, man, thanks for having me. Huh?
It was a pleasure, man. Thanks for coming on.